Welcome to the Unscripted Pharmacist. This is awesome. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. James Muecke. He's a man who's with a remarkable career and dedication. He's had a profound impact, not just on the field of ophthalmology, but also in the world of public health. Dr. Muecke is a highly respected ophthalmologist with over 3 decades of experience in treating and preventing blindness. Not like he does it today, though. His work has led to life-changing eye care in some of the world's most underserved regions. But his contributions extend far beyond the operating room. In 2020, Dr. Muecke was named Australian of the Year, a testament to his tireless advocacy for diabetes prevention and his efforts to combat the devastating effects of diabetic retinopathy, a leading cause of blindness worldwide. Dr. Muecke's passion for public health has made him a powerful voice in promoting healthier lifestyles. He is also a huge proponent of decreasing and reversing these non-communicable chronic disease. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Muecke as he shares his insights on the intersections of eye health, diabetes. I don't know if we're going to be able to get all of this in, but as well as public health. Please join me in welcoming our leader and visionary, Dr. James Muecke. Thanks for being here, Dr. Muecke.
Thank you so much for having me on the show this morning. Well, it's this afternoon where you are, isn't it?
Yes. It's middle of the afternoon, and for your numbers, I think we are 30C right now, but we will get into upper 30s here in California, where it's quite warm, quite sunny, unlike where you are, which is on the other side of the world, where it's winter. And how's the surf?
The surf in Adelaide, we're in a Gulf, so the surf is not great in the Gulf. You've got to travel about an hour or two out to get a decent surf.
Okay. Nice. Fantastic. Yeah, I love the concept of going there and getting lost and just renting a van and just enjoying Southern Australia with a paddleboard in hand.
Oh, if you're a surfer or a paddleboarder, there's plenty of beautiful spots.
I gotta go.
Definitely come. But leave it till March, April next year. That's the best time to be here. The weather is stunning and it's stable and it's just a beautiful time to be here. There's lots of fantastic things to do in and around Adelaide.
Fantastic. So, hey, tell me, diabetes affects so many people, and it affects people that I know. But your complications that you're dealing with is so it's not as common. It's somewhat obscure, and people don't realize until it's too late. And so tell us what happens when you have to sit down and tell them, I love what you do when you're giving very good case studies and showing what it looks like through the eyes of a diabetic. I think that needs to be the take-home message earlier on when we're talking about when people first get diagnosed with diabetes. This is what your vision could look like in 5-10 years if you don't make a change. Until it's oh, it's too late. Now I got to go see the ophthalmologist. There's hardly any preventative care. But not only that, I think that people don't realize that this is fixable, not with a drug, but just everyday things that we do, how we behave, what we eat, the type of foods that we eat, the ultra processed garbage that we're eating. Tell me, I like this question the most, and that is this. Tell me what you thought when you discovered this little secret about what the real cause was of diabetic retinopathy. When was that aha moment, and what did you do about it?
Yeah. Well, it really started back in 2018, Kyle. I mean, as you say, I've been in this game for 35 years, actually. And for that entire length of time, I've been dealing with the blinding consequences that diabetes inflicts on the eye. So this is all types of diabetes. Type 1, which is essentially a autoimmune disease, which is often post-viral, and it usually affects children. But the majority of cases, of course, are type 2, which in this country and in your country, probably close to 90% of the cases. And we have in the order of 2 million people in this country with diabetes. and it is now the leading cause of blindness amongst working age adults in this country. Why is that? Well, probably at least half, probably quite a bit more than half of the 2 million are not having their regular all-important sight-saving eye checks. That's why it's become such a blinding problem. It's also the fastest growing cause of vision loss amongst our First Nations people, our Aboriginal people. So it's a huge public health issue, and it is the most feared complication of diabetes. But extraordinarily, a lot of patients who, when they develop type 2 diabetes, are not aware of this raft of complications that await for them. And I often tell the story of a guy called Neil, who he developed type 2 diabetes at the age of 26, and he had no idea what lay await for him. And I met him in 2018, and his story was quite extraordinary. I was actually with my son doing a documentary about the experience of blindness, what it means to be blind. And I interviewed 10 people, 4 kids who were born blind, and they all had fascinating stories. 4 elderly people who are slowly going blind at the end of their lives due to a condition called age-related macular degeneration. And their stories were interesting, but they were coping because it was a slowly progressive condition, and they had family support, and they just adapted to it. But the 2 that had this deeply profound impact on their lives were 2 people with diabetes who lost their vision in the middle of their life, in the prime of their life, both working age adults. And particularly Neil, who tells the story of going to bed one evening with normal sight and waking up the next morning blind in both eyes. It's almost impossible to comprehend, particularly for me as an eye specialist, to actually comprehend the impact of that. And he's blind. He remains blind to this day. He's also had 2 heart attacks, a stroke, so he's really been devastated by this disease, which he developed at the age of 26. So at the age of 50, he woke up blind in both eyes, and talks about the last thing he saw with his sight, or the last thing he saw was the night before. It was his beautiful wife and her beautiful smile before they went to bed. So it's absolutely harrowing. And I used the footage from that interview with him to create a couple of TV commercials, which one played nationally on one of our major channels, commercial channels, back in late 2018, encouraging people to have their eyes checked so that obviously to prevent this horrendous outcome. And the other one, which played in 2021, which was really about the impact on his family, the devastating impact, not just on the individual, but on the family. So his story had such a powerful impact on me. And this was, at the time, let's say 30 years of ophthalmology, and I only ever saw my role as a guy at the end of the line treating these end-stage complications, these blinding complications. I never thought it was my role to have the conversations about lifestyle, particularly about diet. But what I did, and this really triggered me, this was the aha moment that you talked about. I started reading. I started thinking. So I co-founded and ran for many years a not-for-profit called Sight for All, which is still in existence. I've just no longer functioning as a chair. I'm actually a patron. And in 2018, we started focusing on the damage being wrought by type 2 diabetes in this country. We held a number of events. As I mentioned, we did that documentary. Prior to that point, our focus had been primarily Asia, which is home to half the world's blind adults and 2/3 of the world's blind kids. And we have projects throughout Asia impacting on the lives of over 1 million people every year. But we wanted to bring it back to Australia and to really focus on diabetes being this major blinding issue in this country. And so as part of that process, I just started reading a lot. And I think the one book that had the most profound impact on me was Jason Fung's book, The Diabetes Code, where I actually realized by reading Jason's book that type 2 diabetes could not only be prevented, it could also potentially be reversed. This was a revelation to me. It was an absolute revelation to me. Now, you mentioned in your very nice introduction that I was awarded Australian of the Year. Before you have that lovely honour, you have to be awarded South Australian of the Year. So our state is South Australia, a bit like California. So in when was it? Let's say late 2019, I had that wonderful honour, and at that time, my focus was going to be to raise awareness of this blinding issue of diabetes and encourage people to have their eyes checked. And I got up and made my speech, and I was really just focusing on that as the issue. And then going forward with that, I certainly wasn't expecting to become Australian of the Year. There was some pretty stiff competition, but we had to prepare a speech, and I prepared my speech, and the time came. It was the Australia Day weekend in late January in 2020, and amazingly, my name was called out. And so I was prepared, and I thought, well, if I happen to be given the honour of Australian of the Year, I'm a doctor. What's Australia's biggest health crisis? It's type 2 diabetes, and surely that should be my focus. So that's what I did. I made that my focus, and there's been some extraordinary events that have unfolded since that time.
Yeah, you guys have some progress. Australia's changing. You guys are waking up. And it's thanks to people like you, thanks to people like Gary Fettke. You guys are making some changes and going. I think it's Gary. I think he's getting 3. He's going to put CGMs on. I think on 3 different parliamentary members, and just kind of watch them and like, what a great idea! Like his advice was, go find the right people of influence, change them, and then maybe it will trickle down. So you guys, kudos. The world is waking up, and it's starting with you guys in Australia. It's phenomenal.
Well, let's hope so, because it's a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, globally, since 1980, type 2 diabetes has grown 4-fold, but it's been even more powerful in some other countries and communities. In China, more than a 10-fold increase in type 2 diabetes since that time. In our First Nations people, our Aboriginal people, there's been more than an 80-fold increase in type 2 diabetes in the last half century. It's devastating. This poor people. It's absolutely criminal. And so I'm actually meeting with the State Health Minister this afternoon. After the podcast, I'm meeting with the Preventative Health Advisor to our National Health Minister. So I've got some pretty important meetings coming up today, and
wow.
and just continuing to put pressure on them. But I think one of the most pivotal experiences and moments, I suppose, in this whole journey for me was, you remember, of course, 2020, COVID hit, and it was all the focus was on COVID, and actually, in a way, this incredibly powerful platform that I had as Australian of the Year was absolutely devastated because of COVID. And the one thing that happened was we had our national diabetes strategy refresh during that year. So we had to do a review of the national diabetes strategy. And because of the fact that I was Australian of the Year, and because I was trying to raise awareness of type 2 diabetes, I was actually put on that committee, the expert advisory group. And my sole aim of being on that advisory group was to get remission of type 2 diabetes into that document, which I managed to do. And that was published in 2021. And that was a really pivotal moment, because it meant, no doubt you've heard Gary Fettke's story about Gary being struck off back, I think, in 2012 for telling patients, as a medical doctor, as a surgeon, who was chopping off limbs of patients every week with gangrene due to their type 2 diabetes. He was starting to give them what would seem sensible advice: cut back on your sugar, cut back on your refined carbohydrates, and actually was struck off by our medical board and had several years of investigation. But it's really thanks to Gary and a number of other people in this space that I've had this incredible experience, and the mentorship that Gary and others have given me. And the fact that we actually have that in the National Diabetes Strategy, have that opportunity for remission, meant that we could now talk about it. And we could now talk about it without fear of getting struck off by our regulatory body, and whether that be as a doctor, a specialist, a nutritionist, a dietitian. And it's been quite extraordinary what I've noticed since that time. When it was published in 2021, I thought, oh, well, it's now time to start talking to my patients about diet and lifestyle. And
in the middle of 2021, so what happened?
I think it was mid to late 2021 when the National Diabetes strategy was released, the current draft.
So are people a little bit more receptive? I mean, it seems like, so that now you're saying, like, is the debate a little bit more balanced where we're bringing evidence into this discussion versus this is how it is? Pepsi guy over here says we can't listen to you because, you know, this is a problem for our conflicts of interest. Or do you feel like it's an even dialogue and people actually want to hear what you have to say?
Well, let's start with my patients.
Oh yeah, your patients. Yeah.
So I'm actually treating every week, every day in my clinic, the blinding consequences of this disease. And I have several hundred patients that I'm putting needles into their eye, sometimes every month in both eyes. And it's quite devastating for them. It's quite expensive for them. And that's, as I say, just one of the raft of complications that these poor patients have to look forward to if they don't look to put their disease into remission. In fact, in 2021, the very first sentence on the type 2 diabetes webpage of Diabetes Australia was type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. So the fact that we could then, have this opportunity for remission, so I started talking to my patients, and only the ones in those early days, only the ones that I was actively treating with sight-threatening disease. So I'd lasered their eyes, I'd sticking needles in their eyes, and patient after patient had no idea of remission, this opportunity for remission, this concept of remission. They had no idea. And I think there was maybe one of that first 100 patients, 1% of the first 100 patients that had no idea. Sorry, only one of the first 100 had an idea that or had heard of this opportunity for remission. So this is a conversation that wasn't even being had at the grassroots level with the general practitioner who was managing their disease. So what I decided to do was work with the GPs. So I'd write back to the mutual GP of all of these patients saying, can we explore this incredible opportunity to put their type 2 diabetes in remission, primarily with a change of diet, primarily dropping their carbohydrate intake. As you know, as many of the patients know, this is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. So dropping their carbohydrate intake can potentially put their type 2 diabetes into remission. So most of those letters were ignored. And often I had to, sorry, my phone's just ringing, I'll turn that off. So most of those letters were ignored. Some of the GPs actually took note, and what I did in those letters, I recommended a local nutritionist who specializes in therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, a low carb or a ketogenic diet. And some of the patients started embracing and engaging it. And unfortunately, it's not cheap. We don't have a government-sponsored program where patients have access to nutritionists and dietitians who can specialize in this approach.
Nothing here either.
No.
And it's really hard to find someone like what you found. Finding a dietitian that will make that recommendation. Good for you.
We have a group called Low Carb Down Under, who you probably know.
Yes. And
Low Carb Down Under has a state-by-state resource of all the GP specialists, nutritionists, dietitians, exercise physiologists who are interested and involved in this space. But I'd met the nutritionist, one of the local nutritionists, one of the few nutritionists who actually did it. So I'd say to the GP, please, can you send this patient to see, her name is Rochelle, to explore the opportunity for remission. So a few took it on board, which was exciting. I got a few nasty letters from endocrinologists, but a few took it on board. And I still remember the very first patient that I experienced their type 2 diabetes going into remission. He's a guy called Bevan. And he was having 8 weekly injections in both eyes, had done for many years. And I couldn't extend the injections out beyond 8 weekly. But they were controlling his, the injections are for a condition called macular edema, so diabetes-related macular edema, which is swelling at the central vision area, and it's related to diabetes damage to the fine blood vessels of the retina, at the macula, the central vision area, and you get leakage of fluid into the tissues, and that causes blurring and distortion of vision. So Bevan had been having 8 weekly injections in both eyes, and there was no end in sight. He was, I suspect at the time, in his late 50s, and he had 20, 30 years ahead of him of injections if something else didn't get him in the meantime. Because, of course, what he understood, what he was being told, was his disease was progressive, and there was nothing you could do to avoid that. So he came back between injections. I'd sent him to see the nutritionist. He came back for his next pair of injections and had come off his insulin. Hallelujah. That was an amazing start. And then the next pair of injections, he'd come off all his medicines, all his diabetes, his oral hypoglycemic medications. Extraordinary.
And what did his scans look like?
At that stage, his scans, with the 2 monthly injections, there was pretty much control of his macular edema. Right. So the scans were looking pretty good. But as I said, every time I try to go out, let's say, to 9 or 10 weekly injections, just started to see the swelling coming back. So it wasn't so much his scans that were impressive, that he came back, and I remember him saying that he was thinking more clearly. He lost
a bunch of weight.
He never felt better, and he was starting to see more clearly. Although the scans didn't show anything, he was starting to see more clearly. And over the next, actually, couple of years, I suppose, this would have been 2021, late 2021, I was able to, as he put his type 2 diabetes into remission, start to slowly but tentatively increase the interval between the injections, go to 9, 10, 11, 12 weeks. And I saw him quite recently, and he's now off all his injections. I got him out to 6 monthly injections and then stopped. He's now off all his injections. And he's it's to me, this one experience was the most exciting experience of my 40 years in medicine.
Because that's never happened before, has it?
Never happened before.
Never. You need like a little gong. Bang! This guy lost a bunch of weight. This is great. No more diabetes. But you cured the patient. You'll never see him again. How much?
Well, I think just on that note, Kyle, probably this is why people prefer the term remission. It's a bit like cancer. You can put it into remission, but it might come back. And certainly we got to keep a watch on these patients. And I'll keep a watch on Bevan probably for the rest of his life, just to make sure he can develop more retinal disease. So unfortunately, it's not a cure, but it's life-changing for him. Can you imagine? Life-changing for him. It's also saving the government a bunch of money. The injections, each injection would have cost our health system probably $2,500, about $2,000 US in both eyes, $4,000 every 8 weeks, whatever that is every year, plus all these medicines, plus all the other investigations, doctor's appointments, and complications that he was going through. So it's life-changing for him, and certainly saves a bunch of money for the government and for the taxpayer. You multiply that out. We're now in this country, just the eye injections alone, at the end of 2023, we're up over 150,000 injections. This is for a population of about 25, 26 million. Not sure what it is. Not nearly as much as the States.
We're 40 million in California.
40 million.
It's kind of a big state. Yeah,
that's even bigger.
You're doing. So you said 26 million. You have 100,000 people. 100,000 people taking injections.
150, over 150,000.
150,000. And how much is it a shot? 2,500.
Yeah, let's say 2,500. I think I've costed out at about $250 million every year, probably.
Yeah, 375 billion. Well, that's a lot of money.
It's not sustainable. It's clearly not sustainable. As I keep on saying, this is only one of all of those complications that we see in type 2 diabetes. Loss of vision is said to be the most feared complication, but to me, the most feared complication should be dementia. About 70% of patients with type 2 will develop dementia. And I lost both parents, my mother last year, to dementia. So this, again, is a disease that impacts severely and heavily on the entire family and friends and the workforce. This is, again, this is just two complications. Gary Fettke deals with the second most feared complication, which is loss of limb due to gangrene.
Oh, yeah, awful. So, but when it comes to these complications, I guess we probably should back up. Would it be safe to say that your passion comes from the results, not just within you, because I know you've got a really cool personal TOFI story, as well as what you see in your patients? Is that what's fueling your fire? Is that, I mean, it almost seems like you probably get up in the morning and you don't dread going to work, because work is spreading this wonderful, and fixing this misinformation and sharing great stories like this. And your passion must come from results, because when you see that, which they never taught you in school, there was no cure. There's no, this is the real cause. You can reverse it with this. Like all these mechanisms, they never told us. They never told you about insulin. They never told you, I'm sure, about some of the real mechanisms behind age-related macular degeneration, all the retinopathy, this macular edema. Like when you found that out, like what happened? Like what was your response? So you're like, wait a minute. Why didn't somebody tell us that?
Yeah, absolutely. It suddenly turned my whole ophthalmic practice on its head. You mentioned about my own personal story. We can come to that later. That was just by the by. I mean, it really that was an interesting aside. But the most powerful experience is with my patients and with the results. And it's quite extraordinary to realize that actually, most likely, all the leading causes of blindness in the world are likely metabolic, likely related to poor diet. So age-related macular degeneration, leading cause of blindness in wealthier countries. Diabetic retinopathy, leading cause of blindness amongst working age adults, fastest growing cause of blindness most likely in the world. Glaucoma, the leading cause of preventable blindness. Cataract, the overall leading cause of blindness, all metabolic. So extraordinary that we can turn this around. So yeah, I think going back to 2021 and those initial experiences, and that was, I told you the story about Bevan, but I then started to find a whole bunch of patients who were also doing this. And back then, so I was down to a couple of days a week in my practice. Another story, I have a neurological problem with my right hand, and I had to give up surgery back in 2012. And actually, in 2020, I was hoping to sell on my practice because it was just getting really difficult for me, and it was really causing me a lot of discomfort with my right hand. And thank goodness, I actually got to stay on, because otherwise I wouldn't have had this extraordinary experience for myself and watching this turnaround in my patients. In fact, my practice was getting quite dull. I was injecting, the vast majority of the patients I was injecting into their eyes was age-related macular degeneration. And that's another story. We can't, unfortunately, reverse the damage being done by that. We don't see the same impacts as we do with type 2 diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. So my practice was getting a bit boring, and it was a bit, in a sense, dare I say, a bit like a production line, just patients coming in, injecting their eyes. I mean, doing them fantastic. They were really doing well, most of the patients. But
the drug works. The drugs work, right? Oh, they work great.
Absolutely. It's extraordinary. I remember when I started using them for macular degeneration back in probably 17 years ago now. This was prior to that time. This was universally blinding disease. And they would just go on, and there's pretty much nothing you could do about it. Bleeding, leakage of fluid at the central vision area, eventually scarring up and causing this devastating loss of vision. And then I remember just the first time I gave an injection and seeing that fluid pretty much dissolve away. It's quite extraordinary. It's not quite so dramatic and impressive with diabetic macular edema, that central vision area swelling that we see in patients with diabetes. And it can often take multiple injections before you start to control their edema. So it went from being this kind of dull, pretty uninteresting practice that I had to being this vibrant, extraordinary, fascinating practice where I was actually not only helping my patients with their eyes, but also helping them systemically reverse their type 2 diabetes. So super exciting. And as I said, it has been the most wonderful experience. And it's been an experience that I wish all of my medical colleagues could have. It is quite simply super powerful and super exciting. Yeah. So,
But it's hard to find people to talk to on this wavelength and to go, hey, doc, I got something really exciting and I can't stop. I mean, you almost feel like you're some sort of church missionary. Hang on a minute. Don't run away from me. I got something I want to share. Yeah, it's I don't get a lot of positive response from physicians because I feel like they might feel a little bit threatened, especially from a pharmacist. But, when I tell them, hey, these drugs don't work, there's really no evidence for this. I'm hoping that they're starting to listen, but it's a long road here. I think because of what we're trying to do is so dramatic.
Yeah, it is. And it's and there's lots of vested interests, and we can come back to that later. But certainly when I was in medical school, this was known as, which is quite a long time ago now, it was known as maturity onset diabetes. We're now seeing children as young as 3 in this country, in Australia, with type 2 diabetes, as young as 3. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Northern Australia leads the world for type 2 diabetes in children.
Wow. What's the youngest patient you've seen as an ophthalmologist with retinopathy?
The WHO definition for children is under 16. And I have not seen any kids with type 2 diabetes and retinal disease either. But it has been reported. I just haven't seen it. But most of those, I'm in Southern Australia. Most of the young children with type 2 diabetes are in Northern Australia, particularly from Aboriginal communities. Yeah. So back.
Wait, time. Would you? Okay. So I'm just theorizing this. Would it be a cool study to do injections versus lifestyle?
Absolutely.
I mean, or you use the anti-VEGF in the beginning to try to help get them out of this temporary situation because we don't, this has got to be safe, and then go from, they get their injections like what you're saying, make the injections further apart while you're doing this lifestyle intervention and see if.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I mentioned that back in 2021, I was hoping to sell my practice in 2020, but the guy didn't buy it. And so I stayed on injecting these patients. And when 2021 came and I started talking about remission and I started seeing remission with my patients, that was, a fabulous opportunity to stay on in the practice. And I'm still there. I'm down to about a half a day a week, and I'm just doing injections on a Monday morning because the person that bought my practice in late 2023, ultimately, she didn't want to buy all of my patients or take over the care of all of my patients because she was a glaucoma specialist. So she left me with this cohort of patients, which I'm still treating, and I'm still trying to hand them over. But it's the longer it's gone, the more exciting it's been because I've seen this incredible impact of what we're doing. So patients putting their type 2 diabetes into remission started to increase the interval between injections for those patients who are not only putting their diabetes into remission, but just improving their metabolic health. Okay, perhaps not going into remission in the true sense of the definition, but maybe not even engaging with the nutritionist that I recommended, just cutting back on their refined carb intake, cutting back on their sugar intake, losing weight, coming off their insulin or reducing their insulin dose. And what I'm noticing almost universally is that I've been able to increase the interval between injections. In some, and particularly for those ones that have put their diseases into remission, I've been able to get them off their injections. So what I did, I think it would have been in 2022 then, I had some patients that came to see me with macular edema due to their diabetes, due to their type 2 diabetes. And I thought, okay, this macular edema is borderline. I could put them on the bed and inject their eye, or let's try diet, just change their diet and see whether this will have an impact. And I still remember this young woman, she was 36, had type 2 diabetes for quite some years, I think maybe 8 years. Sent her off to the nutritionist. She came off insulin in 2 weeks. And she put her diabetes into remission pretty quickly. And over the next 9 months, her macular edema normalized on diet alone, and there was no other change. And we've just actually published that case study, and so that's out there in the literature. It's the first time it's ever been reported. Now we have something like 15 patients who I've put their diabetic macular edema into remission. Their diabetic macular edema has resolved. And that case series we presented at the World Ophthalmology Congress in Vancouver last month. And that was super exciting. We also reported 2 case reports. And what I've also noted is that I have now 25 patients, or more than 25 patients actually, but we're going to be reporting that case series of patients who've been able to extend the interval between their injections. In some cases, even stop their injections, despite the fact that they're not put their type 2 diabetes in remission. So this is all super exciting, really novel work that's coming out, never been reported before. And what we're hoping to do now, because obviously people love to see these randomized, double-blind controlled trials. In fact, I'm meeting the academic head of our Department of Ophthalmology in our major eye teaching center in this city this afternoon as well. We've got a really busy day ahead. And I'm going to talk to him about doing a randomized controlled trial where some patients continue on their injections and others with the diet that they're currently receiving. The standard, what we call the SAD diet, the standard American diet, the standard Australian diet, which is a diet packed with ultra-processed foods and sugary drinks, versus patients who reduce their carb intake, and we'll do this with the oversight of a nutritionist, and we will see the difference. And I've no doubt within a year we'll have a remarkable series of results to share with everyone, and hopefully. And I know there was a lot of interest in this at the World Ophthalmology Congress in Vancouver last month. A lot of people were really super interested and excited about this. So hopefully we'll start to see this across the globe. We'll see this tsunami of patients not just putting their type 2 diabetes into remission, but also turning their diabetic eye disease around. And let's hope that ophthalmologists can be the drivers of this, because we can go back to the GPs, go back to the endocrinologists, say to them, let's do this with our patients. This is an extraordinary opportunity.
Right. So are you okay? So I'm a curious person, so I kind of want to know, like, what have you found so far in your pilot study, like the inverse relationship between macular edema or injections and not A1C, but inflammation or insulin levels? I mean, you're probably eventually you'll probably come up with some sort of protocol or recommendation and say, hey, this kind of insulin reduction got us this type of anti-VEGF protocol or interval, right? We've lengthened the interval, and that interval lengthening is related to insulin levels. So you have all these labs that you're going to do, and
that'll be part of the studies going forward. At the moment, I intend to do the labs in my eye practice. I often hear about them. The patients will say my HbA1c is now back to normal, and it's quite exciting to get that feedback from the patients. They come back, they talk about their loss of weight, they talk about their blood sugar coming down, they talk about their HbA1c, their triglycerides improving, all that sort of stuff. But that tends to be the GP combined with the nutritionist to do that. But as part of it, we'll have to do that. That's an important part of it. And
blood pressure's down, weight's off. Hey, I haven't had numbers under 200 in years. What are you doing, doc? This is great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I can imagine. It's very rewarding, isn't it?
It's
and you're giving them vision of all things. But I think for people who are type 2 diabetics, I think it's more meaningful versus if you maybe never were able to see, what you're missing. right? As a type 2 diabetic that's got, now you got cataracts, you can't see as well. Now you got these dark spots. Now you can't, and now I got to go in frequently. And no one's telling them that this is so avoidable. All of it.
one knows. No one knows. This is a problem, and this is why we're trying to get it into medical schools now. We're doing CPD, what we call continuous professional development for GPs, just to get the word out there, because most GPs don't know it. And actually, what I found with the number of the GPs who've engaged in the process, that small number that engaged in it, they're just blown away. They weren't aware of what's going on. This is extraordinary. You know, I always thought of this as,
it's not sustainable, though. Like, you can't do that. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you've had this patient for how long?
Yeah, it's dangerous. They're all going to die. And I had, as I said, I had some nasty letters from endocrinologists. I had one endocrinologist who disowned their patient. I had another endocrinologist who wrote to me really nasty letters saying he'd tried this back in the 70s, and all the patients died. And actually, did you realize back in the 70s, most people with type 2 diabetes were smokers as well. So, you know, you can't peel away the therapeutic carbohydrate reduction as being the culprit in their demise. And we know now that it's safe. And the endocrinologists get a bit worried because it entails a change in medications, often a dramatic change in medications, particularly insulin. As I mentioned, that lady came off her insulin within a couple of weeks. You know, so they can go hypoglycemic. And I had one patient who did it by himself, actually, unfortunately, went hypoglycemic. So I always suggest does it in conjunction with their GP or endocrinologist. But the endocrinologists starting to come on board. So back in 2022, I got Gary Fettke over to Adelaide, and I wanted to, because I was getting this bite back from the endocrinologist saying, "Oh, it's dangerous," and you're going to kill the patients. And that was not my understanding. And there were a bunch of low carb practitioners, including GPs, nutritionists, dietitians in the city. So I thought, well, let's get everyone together and let's have a round table meeting to discuss their concerns and see if we can move forward with this. And it was quite an adversarial meeting. It was actually more than a round table. It was actually a whole room full of practitioners. And
I think Gary has been forever scarred from that meeting.
Hey, yeah.
But he survived.
But yeah, survived. And as a result of that, my plea at the end was okay, clearly it can happen because we actually have patients who are putting their disease in remission. Okay, there's a safety issue because the patients need to be deprescribed, demedicated. Let's get together and look at writing some guidelines for this. So the following year, so this was late 2022, 2023, one of the low-carb GPs and one of the endocrinologists who was a bit skeptical. Interestingly, that endocrinologist, I saw him chatting at the end of the meeting with one of the nutritionists, started sending his patients to that nutritionist, and actually she started putting their type 2 diabetes in remission. So he then went from being skeptical to being a believer. And actually, I know he was presenting at the Australian Diabetes Congress again last month about remission of type 2 diabetes. He was the former president of the Australian Diabetes Society. So those two got together, and over the year, it took them a year, unfortunately, but in early 2024, early this year, the guidelines for therapeutic carbohydrate reduction for patients with type 2 diabetes, how to demedicate, how to deprescribe patients, was released. And on the back of that, that was endorsed by the Australian Diabetes Society. It was endorsed by Diabetes Australia, and we're just seeing this massive shift, and it's super exciting. So Gary is a real hero in all of this, and Gary and I got a bit of a battering in that meeting, and it was really very stressful. In fact, the whole thing's been bloody stressful, but I think we're now over that, and we're now meeting with medical schools trying to get this into curricula. There's also another group called Defeat Diabetes, which is Peter Bruckner's group, and Peter's one of the luminaries in this area as well. And so we're in conjunction with Peter Bruckner's group, Defeat Diabetes, and what we have an Australian offshoot of the American Metabolic Health Society called the Australasian Metabolic Health Society. So we have a group here which is in its infancy, really, but we have paired up with Peter Bruckner's Defeat Diabetes. We're going to be talking to GPs. Just on Sunday, the 1st of September, we launched a 10-module course on metabolic health called Essentials of Metabolic Health for dietitians.
Oh.
So this was a group that traditionally has been very anti-low carb. So they're now taking it on board. The nutritionists are taking it on board. So we're seeing this massive turning of the tide. So it's very exciting.
It's not sponsored by Pepsi?
No.
Sanitarium, Kellogg's. Like, how did you do that?
Well, I met with the president of Dietitians Australia early 2023, and I told them about this, rewriting these guidelines, and she said to me, "Okay, well, when the guidelines are released, come back to me and we can look at it." So when early 2024 came, a year later, I met again with the team from Dietitians Australia, and I said, "Okay, well, quite simply, it's now in our national diabetes strategy. You cannot ignore it any longer. We've written guidelines for therapeutic carbohydrate reduction."
It's law now.
It's policy. But not only that, it's endorsed by Diabetes Australia. It's endorsed by the Australian Diabetes Society. We have an Australasian Metabolic Health Society who are taking this forward. You've got to get on board or we're going to get left behind. And when you realise in this country there are probably close to 8,000 dietitians, they're the one group that can be instrumental in this process. They've got to stop telling people who have type 2 diabetes to eat a high-carb diet. Yes, they've had massive sponsorship from the cereal and grain and the breakfast cereal industry in the past, but they say they've shaken that off, and hopefully they're embracing this new paradigm shift.
You guys are educating the professionals, and I don't see that happening here. I think you guys have stepped on a whole bunch of toes. You've ruffled a whole lot of feathers to get where you've gotten. And I'm surprised you didn't get a whole lot of pushback. Like, I had expected someone to come in and say, you're going to lose your sponsorship, right? If you're going to go with this policy change. I think they put their necks on the line, and kudos for them for being courageous as well. Wow.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's there are a bunch of public health bodies in this country, the Heart Foundation of Australia, who is still sponsored by Sanitarium, ultra-processed food company. And I've written to all of them, or most of them at least, saying, okay, you've got to shake this sponsorship. And I know, running a not-for-profit for 15 years, we had an experience with a pharmaceutical company that we had been funded. Sorry, not a pharmaceutical company, an optical company that were sponsoring us, that got into a lot of strife, and we had to drop their sponsorship. And it was a lot of money, and it really hurt us, but it was the right thing to do. Yeah. And so I think what we've got to do is drop this sponsorship of the ultra-processed food industry, of the food industry in general, of the sugary drinks industry, of the fast food industry, all the ones that are causing us harm. And of course, many of the medical schools are funded by the pharmaceutical industry. Many doctors are, many of the academics, many of the teachers, many of the research institutes, many of the much of the research is by
all of it. It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, I think we have to, and I've been, Diabetes Australia, I said to the CEO in a meeting a year or two ago, saying you've got to shake. You can't continue to be funded by the pharmaceutical industry. You just can't be taken seriously. Massive conflicts of interest. Right. So she took that on board, and what they've been doing is looking at philanthropy for funding of their work. So that's
wow.
There's so much to talk about here, Kyle.
Yes, and, you guys are moving things. It's insane. The world is shaking over here in Australia. Things are changing over here. I think it's great. I'm so freaking excited for you guys.
It's very exciting. And there's one kind of piece of the puzzle which I haven't quite solved yet. We know that about 50% plus of patients who attempt it will put their type 2 diabetes into remission, which begs the question, what about that other 50%? Why is half not being able to do it? Well, their pancreas may be so shot that they just can't simply reverse their type 2 diabetes. But what we're seeing, and Rod Taylor's work out of the UK, what we thought of as irreversible pancreatic damage might be just atrophy, and it actually can reignite the pancreas and the function of the pancreas. But I suspect there'll be an element of patients who can't. I suspect there's a small element. Then you've got what other reasons why someone might not be able to reverse their type 2? Maybe they're not doing it correctly. Maybe they need better guidance from a healthcare professional, a nutritionist.
Stress, sleep. There's so many variables that goes into glucose.
Not the variables, but I think, just sorry to interrupt, the one thing we know, the type 2 diabetes is strongly associated with food addiction.
Yeah. So
it's very hard for people, often vulnerable people. We know that type 2 diabetes is more prevalent in lower socioeconomic groups. Our Aboriginal, our First Nations people are very
affected.
Very disadvantaged people, like your First Nations people as well.
Yeah.
So you have food addiction, but you also have an industry, or industries being the ultra-processed food and the sugary drinks industry, preying on people's addictions with their addictive food, preying on vulnerable people with type 2 diabetes with addictive food. You walk into the chemist these days, and the checkout counter is surrounded by half-price chocolates and soft drinks. The chemist, office works, office supply stores, post offices, let alone the supermarkets and the general stores. It's just diabolical.
But it might as well be cigarettes, because it's the same scientists hijacking the food to make it so addictive. You can't. I mean, I don't know. Like, if you had some of these foods, you would taste it and go, "Wow, what an experience! Like, what am I tasting? This is insane!" Like every part of your tongue gets lit up at the right time, so that it leaves you wanting more. But that's to the tobacco industry. Those are some wicked people. They know what they're doing.
Absolutely,
it's not fair.
When the tobacco industry collapsed, the food industry bought up many of the scientists, and hallelujah, you have how can we engineer these foods to be addictive and alluring and hyperpalatable, and ultimately this encourages overconsumption. And I know in the US it's something like 62% of the calories in the US diet are ultra processed food. In kids, it's 2/3. In Australia, in the UK, it's now over 50%. In Australia, I think we're nudging close to 50% of our diet is ultra processed food. And
awful. The children is the problem, though. Like, when children at a very young age have a liver like an alcoholic, have fatty liver disease, and I talked to a abdominal radiologist not that long ago, and he said one of his colleagues has seen a 6-year-old, but I think he's seen like a 10-year-old with fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Like, how could this be? But I think Robert Lustig a long time ago was like, wait a minute. Why are these kids as tall as they are around? Because you have on the WIC, our welfare program for women, infant, and children, to make sure that they have proper nutrition. It's Sunny Delight. It's orange juice. You're saying this is healthy. How can we get it out of people's heads that juice is horrible? It's soda pop, right? How do we fix this problem when it comes down to public policy? We can't. I would love to see how your public policy is going to start changing, as far as like what are people going to be, what's going to be available to them? Because here in the US, it's just EBT card. You can get anything.
Yeah.
As long as it's not hot. That's the only definition.
Yeah, we have a what's called a health star rating system, which is a flawed system. One, because it's only a third of manufacturers use it because it's a voluntary process, but also there are a number of ultra processed foods which get the healthiest 5-star rating, and yet they're packed with sugar, refined carbs, and seed oils. And you realize this is an industry device designed by industry for industry. So our health star rating system is deeply flawed. Having said that, a couple of years ago, I think it was in early 2022, orange juice was downgraded from 5 stars down to 2 stars.
Good.
And it received a lot of uproar, and particularly from the industry. And I had an interview on the radio, and I was being interviewed together with the CEO of one of the orange juice companies, who was not aggressive. He said, "Oh my goodness, this is going to devastate our business. What do we do?" And rightly so. I mean, a glass of orange juice has as much sugar as a glass of cola, and that's just a start. And so industry, as we know, will pivot. I mean, we know Coca-Cola is now having no sugar Coke, and it's now being involved more in bottled water. And so farmers will pivot, industry will pivot, but it has to. I grant it has to happen slowly. It can't happen overnight because it would leave food insecurity for a lot of people. It will devastate businesses. It will devastate the economy. This has to happen slowly. But we have in South Australia, the Riverland area is a major orange growing area for our country, the leading orange growing area for our country. Having said that, our major export is wheat. The source of highly refined wheat flour, which is a metabolic disruptor. It's simply sugar in disguise. Yeah. So, we can't devastate these industries. So it's got to happen slowly. Give these industries, these farmers time to pivot, and it's going to happen. I mean, we know the cigarette epidemic and the epidemic of disease related to cigarettes taken decades to reduce. And I think this is going to take longer because this is actually a much more complicated. That was just one thing. That was just cigarettes, essentially. You can say there's cigars and pipes and things, but it's basically all the same thing. It's nicotine and tobacco. But here you have a much bigger beast, and so it's going to be a much bigger process to turn around. But I think we need a brave government to take it on board to start to do that. And unfortunately, I think because of my kind of pestering of the health minister, we had a parliamentary inquiry into diabetes late last year, and there's been a number of suggestions as a result of that inquiry. One, that we start to promote low-carb diets for patients with type 2 diet or with all types of diabetes. And another one was we should have, rather than a blanket dietary guidelines, we have dietary guidelines specifically for people with type 2 diabetes. So again, we're seeing this shift, but I think the government has to stop this predatory behavior of these of the ultra-processed food, sugary drinks, and fast food industry. If I walk around my city, everywhere, bus stops, buildings, it's just plastered with predatory marketing of these various industries.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be a global collapse if everyone just changed overnight. It has to go slowly. I mean, really, if you think about it, over time, the orange orchards needs to be changed into grassland. But your wheat needs to be changed to grassland. It's going to take some time, but it's going to take a lot more people opening their mouth and going, man, look what happened to me. Because they should be telling 100 people, like, what a great experience this was. I can see now. I don't have diabetes. I lost all this weight. I mean, it's this steamrolling effect, right? It's like, oh yeah, I tried Atkins. Well, did you think about trying it again? Because maybe you didn't do it right. Right? Maybe there's a better way of doing this, and you haven't given it a fair shake. So no, I think what you're doing in Australia is phenomenal. I think you are really shaking things up, and kudos to you guys. Keep it up. That is amazing. You're leading the example here, because people here, when you are diabetic and you're in the hospital, we are going to manage your diabetes with insulin. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if, you've got to eat this entire tray with, 100 grams of carbohydrates on it, but this is what you're going to get, right? This is what it's come down to for you. And I love taking pictures of those trays. Like, this is crazy. I can't believe how many grams of this constant carbs. They call it consistent carbs. Usually it was 70 grams of carbs 3 times a day, at least, because we're stuck on this stupid concept that the brain needs dietary glucose. And it's like, no, we'll make glucose from other substrate. Done. Be done. It's not necessary to eat carbohydrates all the time. We wouldn't be here. So I think more of this discussion needs to happen on a very common sense basis. But you guys are coming together and going, let's go over the evidence. Let's discuss it. I want an open debate. I want to talk about this. Come join. Let's discuss this in a fair debate. Let's bring evidence. Let's talk about what we have. But we also have these N of 1. I'm an N of 1. You're an N of 1. You've changed your life around. You've lost a bunch of weight and got healthier. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's so exciting, Carl.
Yes. But I appreciate you being. You know what? Maybe I'll have to do this another time when you tell us your personal story. I know about your tofu story, though. I do love it. It's always something amazing.
Yeah, well, it is. And I was in hospital a couple of weeks ago. I had an inguinal hernia repair, and my breakfast menu came out, and it was there's a heart healthy tick against all the carbs and the bacon and eggs. Oh, that's dangerous. That's dangerous. It's quite extraordinary. But this is all based on our Australian dietary guidelines, which is kind of based on the US dietary guidelines, which are a high carb eating pattern. They recommend up to 65% of our energy comes from carbs. And this is a document that's used broadly. It's used by cooks, childcare, through aged care, prisons, hospital, defence force, used by our army of health educators and health policy makers and health providers. And it's just diabolical. It's currently being reviewed, and it's not going to be released till 2026. But hopefully we'll see a shift away from this demonization of red meat, demonization of saturated fat, celebration of seed oils and margarines. We've got to see the shift. We have to, otherwise we're going to be in big trouble. And on my own health journey, back in 2020, I actually had I think it was an ultrasound. No, it was maybe an MRI scan for. I had some lower back pain, and the week before, I think I had a patient who had some lower back pain, had a scan, actually had cancer in their lower back. So I just thought, oh gosh, I think it's musculoskeletal, but let's do this. And I found out I had a fatty liver. And if you can see me, I'm quite tall and thin, and I was tall and thin back then, but I still had a fatty liver. And I realized what I was consuming was diabolical. It was driving me, driving insulin resistance, and probably driving me towards type 2 diabetes. But quite literally, within a couple of months, dropping my carbs and seed oils, I turned that around, and recent scan shows no fatty liver. So this, I talked about diabetic macular edema reversing. But what we're seeing in virtually all the complications, unfortunately, if you have advanced retinal disease, we're not going to see a reversal. We might see some improvement or stabilization, but we're not going to see a reversal. Equally with other things like gangrene and loss of limb. But what we are noticing almost universally is this improvement in all of the potential complications of this disease.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. So if people want to get a hold of you, how do we get a hold of you?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I haven't got an X or a Twitter account. I do, but I don't use it. I had enough. Enough attacks on those platforms without going to Twitter. And then if people are interested in the work we're doing with my not-for-profit Sight for All, certainly Sight for All, sightforall.org, and you can sign up to our newsletter or also follow us on socials as well.
Right. So there is so much to diabetic retinopathy. If you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, and you want to know how bad this can get, it's blindness. There's nothing worse than blindness, not being able to see the world around you. And it's all a preventable. It's just by what you're putting in your mouth. You have to just learn to say no and be bold and courageous and take a step forward and go, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be like everybody else today. Today's a different day. I'm gonna do things a little bit differently, and I'm gonna stay out of Dr. Muecke's office. All right, I'm gonna stay away. I'm gonna stay away from my doctor. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and good night, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate speaking with you today.